How to use your elevation box on Practicad. Practicad offers an elevation box that makes it simple to put objects at the proper Z elevation at any time. We can also edit any entity at any time through the elevation box. Currently, the box is set to 0 with 0 values entered. It's as if we just opened up a brand new drawing. All we can see here is that we've got a 0, 0 current elevation. This red line and this red arrow is representing the elevation that we are currently working on. What that means is if we were to grab an entity in Practicad and place it on the drawing right now, the center line of that object would be at 0, 0. For example, we're going to grab a piece of rectangular duct from our fitting bin. Once I click on the duct, you can see that Practicad is showing us the object we're holding, and now it's holding the center line of this duct at 0, 0, which is our current elevation. Now here we have two choices. Either A, we could grab the little red arrow and move up or down to any elevation point we'd like, or we can keypad in the values we want here. What Practicad is representing here is the top, center, and bottom of the entity we're holding in reference to absolute 0. Therefore, the center line of this duct is at 0 inches, top of the duct is at 9 inches, and the bottom of the duct is at negative 9 inches. And that's an 18-inch difference because the depth of this fitting is 18. Now what we're going to do is we'll say, let's set the bottom elevation of this duct to 10 foot. I type in 10 foot, I hit enter, and now we place it on the drawing. Now we're going to grab a different entity. We're going to grab a supply grill, and notice when I check the supply grill, it switched the grill tab in the fitting box, and in the elevation box it says grill supply. Here you can see that the center line of the grill is at 10 foot 9, which was our current elevation. Essentially, this is usually the last elevation value we typed in. And now what we're going to do is say put the bottom of this grill at 15 foot. Hit enter and place it on the drawing. Now if we would like to edit the elevation of either one of these entities, all we need to do is click on the duct or the grill, and you can see here that it's going to list the object we're holding. It's going to show us our last current elevation, and then it's showing the top, center, and bottom of the entity we checked in reference to absolute 0. If I would like to move this duct up to 20 foot, I can type in 20 foot, hit enter, and it'll edit that duct's elevation. If I have more than one entity selected, you can see that Practicad instantly puts a scroll bar which allows us to choose between the entities we have selected. You can see here now I've got rect duct, or if I move this to the right, I have the supply grill's height. So I could say put the supply grill at 10 foot, then I can use the left arrow check to move the box over and say put the rectangular duct's elevation at 10 foot as well. In part 2 of the elevation box, we're going to teach you how to build relative bottom and relative top marks. Building relative bottom points is extremely important to make sure that one, all of the tags on your drawing are referenced from the proper reference points, and two, that when you export your drawing, that all the entities in your drawing are actually at the right height in the BIM model. For example, in this tutorial, we're going to pretend that we have got a floor, and that floor is going to be at 20 foot. To represent that, we're actually going to take a rectangular slab. We're going to create it to be 400 by 400. And we're going to say that the top of this slab will be at 20 foot in absolute 0 elevation. So the top of this slab is at 20 foot in absolute 0 elevation. Now what we're going to do is we're going to want to put objects on the drawing above this slab. Let's say it's at the 3rd floor. And we're going to want to reference all of our elevation tags from the duct we place above it, from the slab below it. So we're going to reference it to the floor. However, we want to make sure that when we export this drawing, that duct, if we put it 10 feet above a 20-foot high slab, the duct should be 30 foot in the BIM model. So to do this, we need to make sure we create the proper reference points. Currently, when we go to grab a fitting, I'm going to use rectangular duct, and we go to the elevation box, you can see that Practicat is showing the top, center, and bottom of the object we're holding in reference to absolute zero. Now, if we create relative marks, Practicat is going to give us some different information. So what we're going to do is we're going to Itscape. We're going to clear out the fitting, and I'm going to put the current elevation back at 0. We're going to create a new elevation mark in the elevation box. To do that, we move our cursor over to the left side, and once you see that white arrow, you click once with your left mouse click, and that will create a new relative mark. And we actually defined this value right here, which says 0, as the relative mark. And often we train the users to use relative mark 0 as your reference 0. For example, in this particular tutorial, we're going to say that there's a 20-foot slab, and that's going to be the 0 for our drawing. It's going to be what we call the relative bottom. Everything in the drawing we tag is going to be referenced to this point. So what we need to do is create a 20-foot mark, and we need to create it as relative bottom. To do that, I'm just going to click on the notation here, and I'm going to type in 20 foot and hit enter. Now, right away, we don't see the relative mark, and the reason why is because it's actually now at the top of my elevation box. As we add relative marks and new elevation points, they're going to go above and below our current elevation. So Practicat is going to give us this browser that allows us to scroll up and scroll down. We also have some search functions inside the elevation box as well. You'll notice that we can zoom in to elevation points, or we can zoom out. Obviously, if we continue to hit the minus and zoom out, we will finally see our 20 foot and 0 foot together. There's also a top 0, bottom 0. That is designed to show you the relative top and the relative bottom, and it centers the elevation box to those two views. We're going to show that later in these tutorials. And the one that we use the most is the elevation marks view. If you click on this, it simply centers the elevation box from the lowest point you've created and the highest point you've created. It's a fit to view for your elevation box. Now that we've created the 20-foot relative mark, which is going to be used as our new 0, we now need to set it as relative bottom. To do that, we're going to click on the yellow circle on the bottom. Notice there's two. Going to click on the bottom one. When I do that, Practicat turns it to blue. Blue represents relative bottom. The opposite of this would be relative top. If I click on the blue icon again, Practicat will reset to the two yellow circles, and if I click on the top one, it will turn green. Green represents relative top. To keep this tutorial simple to start, we're only going to work from relative bottom during these exercises. So I'm going to click on it again to reset it, and then turn it blue. Now, once we've created a relative bottom in the software, all the entities we select will now show us how far they are, not just from absolute 0 or our current elevation, but also how far we are from relative bottom. For example, if I were to come and grab a piece of rectangular duct, and I were to put the absolute bottom at 30 foot, you could see that Practicat's showing me the top of duct is 31 foot 6 inches from absolute 0. The bottom of duct is 30 feet above absolute 0. Over here, it's showing us the TCB for top, center, and bottom of the entity we're holding in reference to relative bottom. So you can see that the bottom of duct is 10 foot above 20 foot, or our relative bottom. And the top of duct is 11 foot 6 inches above our 20 foot relative bottom mark. Now when we go to place objects on the drawing and we use relative bottoms, we generally ignore these values here. We know that we want this duct to be 15 feet above the floor, or relative bottom. So what we do is we come right here and just type in 15 foot, and then we hit enter and we put it on the drawing. Now, when we go to tag, our tags actually reference the entities we click on from absolute zero. Not absolute zero, but relative mark zero. For example, you can see here we've got a tag called elevation 0 no leader. This is the Practicat default elevation tag. There are separate tutorials on how to build these tags and how these tags work. Currently, we're teaching you how to use the ones we've already got. And there are going to be exercises on this as well. So we're going to say, let's tag it with elevation 0. We come over here. I'm going to put it on the drawing. And notice that when I go to place it down, it says bottom at 15 foot. What that tag is actually doing, and we will explain it in later tutorials, is it's taking the absolute elevation, top and bottom, of the entity we're holding, and it's subtracting the relative mark elevation. So it's saying that the bottom of duct, it's at absolute 35 foot, and then it's doing the math and saying minus 20 foot, and it's giving us the bottom at 15 foot. Same thing with the top. So the tag is actually showing us the distance between the bottom duct and our relative bottom point, or our relative 0 point. Whether or not this is actually set at relative bottom doesn't make a difference. The tag is actually targeting the 0 relative mark. In other words, even if this is set so it's not relative bottom, here you can see it's targeting this mark. This tag takes the absolute elevation and subtracts the relative 0 mark. So the first step on every drawing is actually to open up your drawing, find out what your new 0 is, or your new reference point, put it in as 0.0, and then set it to relative bottom to start. So let's continue to look at this. I'm going to use my elevation marks view to center from my highest point and my lowest point. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to place one more piece of duct above the slab by 5 foot. I'm going to grab this duct, I'm going to come down, and notice I've only got 3 values again. It's because we haven't set anything to relative bottom. We undid it. Second we check this to blue, 3 values appear. And now what we want to do is ignore the absolute 0 values. We're going to come over here and I'm going to say, let's put the next slab 5 foot above relative bottom, also known as 25 foot. But this allows me so we don't have to do the math. We can just work from relative bottom and forget about it for the rest of the drawing. I'm now going to take this duct, place it on the drawing. Now, if we look at this duct work in front view, we'll be able to see this duct's at 15 foot. This one's obviously lower. Let's click on it and see what we've done. Right here, we need to change it back to 5 foot. And notice when we type in 5 foot here, it moves it 5 foot above the slab, or at 25 foot. And notice that this duct here is at 35 foot elevation, but bottom 15 foot. Once again, if we go to tag the duct work using our elevation 0, the tag itself actually does the adjustment. So it represents on our drawing 5 foot as it represents 15 foot here. But our ductwork is actually at 35 foot and 25 foot from datum 0. So when we export this to Navisworks or use it for BIM modeling, it is correct. That is how to design relative bottom points. In the next portion of this tutorial for the elevation box, we're going to show you how to create multiple reference points. In this particular tutorial, it's going to be multiple slab heights, and we're going to treat them as different zones where we run duct over both of them, but some duct needs to be tagged to this first reference point, some duct needs to be tagged over the second reference point. The first thing we must do is make sure that both reference points are marked in our elevation box. Currently, we're going to go to the elevation marks view, press the button, and you can see here that we've got the top and bottom. The top we have here is 20 foot. This slab right here, if we click on it, you can see that the top of that slab, it's 20 feet above absolute zero. We have used this as our elevation 0, our relative mark 0, and we've set it to relative bottom. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the second slab. You can see that the top of that slab is at 25 feet from absolute 0. And we're going to create a second relative mark. And what we're going to do is we're going to move our cursor to the left. And then we're going to click on the elevation value and give it 25 foot. Notice the PractiCAD's automatically generating in sequential order. It goes from 0 to 1. However, we're going to call this relative mark 1A and hit enter. Now what we're going to want to do is be able to tag elevation tags from duct above, everything above this elevation mark, and everything from this elevation mark. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab a fitting from our fitting bin. We're going to grab rectangular duct. And we're going to say to set the bottom of duct 15 foot above relative bottom. And relative bottom is currently 20 foot. Remember, the values we see here, all they're doing is telling us the top, center, and bottom of duct in reference to whatever our current relative bottom point is. For example, they say 15 now because the bottom of duct is at 35 foot. That's where we're holding it in absolute. So it's 15 foot above 20 foot or relative bottom. However, if we switch our new relative mark 1A to relative bottom, you'll notice that these values will change. So if I were to put 15 foot in here now, that means 15 foot above whatever relative bottom happens to be at that point in time. So if we've set 25 foot to relative bottom, and we said be 15 foot above it, we're at 40 foot in absolute elevation. So we can toggle between what's relative bottom, and it does not have any effect on our tags, and we're going to show that to you now. So what we're going to do is we're going to say that we're going to change the 20 foot back to relative bottom. So we come here, we're going to click on our yellow button, and that'll switch it to blue or relative bottom. Once again, I like to use the elevation marks view because it centers everything, makes it easy to scroll through my elevation box. Now what we're going to do is say, okay, let's put bottom at 15 foot. And that just means 15 foot above this slab here that we've got marked. I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to draw a duct running from left to right on the screen, just like this. Now, if we go to tag duct on this side, which is over elevation mark 0, we use elevation 0 tag. So in other words, here I use this tag. I click and we can see that it's going to say bottom at 15 foot. However, if we're going to tag duct over this spot, which we've marked this area as relative 1A, we use the 1A tags. You can see we've created a 1B, a 1C, a 1D. So there's already enough for 5 different slab heights in your current data. And there's also another 5 to 10 built inside your documentation tags. And there's tutorials on how these tags work. But if I want to tag something over 1A, I simply grab the 1A tag and then I click on duct that's over 1A, and now it's telling me that bottom is at 10 foot. So we've tagged this duct to this relative mark of this slab, and we've tagged this duct to the relative mark that this slab is at. And you don't need the slabs on the drawing. These tags have nothing to do with the slabs in the drawing. They have everything to do with these relative marks in the elevation box. Now the best part about this is if we go to change or edit the duct, these tags will edit based on their relative marks. For example, if I click on this duct here, you can see that it's at 35 foot in absolute elevation. And if in fact I raise it to 40 foot, you'll notice that both of these elevation tags are going to change. So I'm typing in 40 foot in the elevation box and hitting enter. Now you can see that this is 20 foot above its spot. This is 15 foot above its spot. So looking at the front view, you can see that we've got this slab is actually at 0. 20 foot above that, we've got our first relative mark. 5 foot above that, we have our next relative mark. And then we have our duct line above that. However, each of these is being tagged based on the reference point below it. So the drawing is correct, the tags are correct, and when we go to export this drawing for the BIM model, this duct is going to be at the right elevation. So very important. Once again, we can toggle between relative bottoms and we can tag to different reference points. If we're going to come in here and grab a second duct line, this time we're going to say, let's tag this duct 5 foot above this slab. Well, what I can do is I can come into my elevation box, fit to view, and say, I want my relative bottom points that Practicad's reading to me. I want Practicad to read it to me from 1A mark. So I click on the blue right here. Turn that blue. Practicad has switched it. And now I have a new relative bottom. So now when I say, let's put this 5 feet, bottom and 5 foot, it means 5 foot above whatever my relative bottom is. And that happens to be 25 foot. So you can see it's at 30 foot. So when I place it here, I put it right on top. Once again, if I'm over the 1A section, going to give it a 1A tag. And I would continue to do this for as many different slab heights as we need. So this is how to work with multiple relative bottoms. In the fourth part of the elevation tutorials, we're going to go over using both relative bottom points and relative top points. There is no difference between the way relative top works and the relative bottom works. However, it does add a lot more values in the elevation box. So you want to make sure you've got a very good understanding of the first 3 parts of the elevation tutorials before you move on to this one. In this tutorial, we're going to route duct in this section here. This section we have marked as 1A. And we have set it to be our new relative bottom by just clicking here and setting the bottom to be blue. So we're going to use the top of this slab, which is at, if you click on it, top of slab is at 25 foot in absolute elevation. That's going to be our relative bottom. And then what we're going to do is we're going to click on the steel, and you can see we've got steel beams here, and the bottom of steel is at 35 foot in absolute elevation. And we're going to set bottom of steel as the new relative top for our drawing. In other words, our workspace is going to be top of slab to bottom of steel. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another elevation mark into the Practicat elevation box. To do that, I'm going to bring my cursor to the left until the arrow turns white. I'm going to click, and right here, it's already lined up for me at 35 foot. So what we're going to do is now we're going to set 35 foot, which is the bottom of the steel, and we're going to set it to be relative top. All we do here is instead of the bottom yellow, we click the top one. It will turn green. Now Practicat gives us this top zero, bottom zero view. And what that does for us is if we click on it, it centers the elevation box from relative top and relative bottom. It's a quick view from relative top. So this is actually the space that we're working in. In absolute, we're working from 25 foot to 35 foot. However, because we've created relative top and relative bottom points, we can use all of these values here to place stuff down. For example, we're going to grab a piece of duct. Notice the duct now has relative top, center, and bottom from absolute zero. It's got top, center, and bottom of duct from relative bottom. And it's got top, center, and bottom of duct from relative top right here. So for example, if I wanted to say make the top of duct 2 inches underneath relative bottom, or let's say 2 feet, we can click here and type in -2 foot. And that would mean that the top of duct is 2 feet underneath relative top, which is actually 2 feet underneath our steel beam. And we're going to place it right here. And if in fact we wanted bottom of duct to be 5 foot above the slab, I could say bottom of duct 5 foot. So generally we use the top to use as a reference point from relative top, and we use the bottom here as a reference point from relative bottom. These are usually the two values we focus on. So if I type in 5 foot from relative bottom, right now this duct is going to be 5 foot above the slab. So if we're going to tag that duct, we're going to tag it with the 1A tag. Because we're working in 1A and we want the top and bottom of this to be referenced from that, we're going to use the 1A tag. And you can see it says that this duct is at 5 foot. If we click here, you can see that this one is at a different elevation. Remember, we just said top of duct should be 2 inches underneath the steel. So if we click on that, you can see here that this is the value. Once again, let's change this to -2 foot and hit enter. And you can see here now that it's 2 foot, top of duct 2 foot underneath the steel beam, which was set at 35 foot. You can see these values. So as we go to put this in the front view, you can see here that we've placed 2 pieces of duct down, one using a relative top point, one using a relative bottom point. And we'll just zoom in right here. And you can see just by dimensioning from these 2 points that we're exactly, top of duct is 2 foot from bottom of steel. And you can see that if we were to do a dimension line from here, we're not grabbing to the exact spot, but we're about bottom of duct about 5 foot above the slab. So we are putting it on there correctly. So that concludes the tutorials on relative top and relative bottom. Please go through the exercises on elevation marks.